Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, here to discuss 2025's Wrestlepalooza, the first Wrestlepalooza since 1998, and the first ever of under the WWE banner. Now, we did a live stream yesterday about the boycott, and I was one of those that boycotted. I did not uh, get the app. I did not watch it on the app. I watched it illegally. I'm not paying $30 for that bullshit, especially after after what they did to Jimmy Kimmel. You know what I mean? But I watch it illegally on a streamer app. So here's the results. It takes place in Indianapolis, Indiana. And like I said, it was historic because it was the first pay-per-view, the first premium live event under the uh, the banner of ESPN Unlimited, the new app that they have, right? And from this point on, WWE will air all of its premium live events on this app. You know what I mean? Which is part of the Disney bundle, which is part of, includes Hulu, includes uh, other ESPN stuff, and includes, of course, the original Disney catalog. So, needless to say, there was a lot of hype around this show because usually when WWE switches formats in some sort of way, they usually do it at WrestleMania. And that was the impression that I was getting, that they weren't going to do it till WrestleMania 20, WrestleMania 42. But apparently they couldn't wait. They couldn't wait to do it, right? Yeah, Sean says he didn't like it. It was shitty. Yeah, we're getting there, Damien. Uh, they couldn't wait to do this. They had to do this. They just had to do it prematurely. They couldn't wait till WrestleMania. Every other significant event that's ever happened in the history of the WWE was always done around WrestleMania time. When they bought WCW and ECW, that was around WrestleMania time. When the WrestleMania was the first pay-per-view, that was WrestleMania time. When they purchased them and the UFC decided to merge together and Endeavor purchased it to form TKO. That was around WrestleMania time. When they moved to Peacock, that was around WrestleMania time. When they launched the WWE Network, that was around WrestleMania time. Everything that they've done in their history is mostly done around WrestleMania time. But they couldn't wait this time. They just had to do it this time. And it was running head to head with AEW for the first time ever in the history of wrestling. Well, not the first time ever, but the first time since 1987. Two promotions ran a pay-per-view or special event, live event, back to back with each other. Right? That even during the height of the Monday Night Wars in the 1990s, they didn't even do that. But the event sucked. It was terrible. I'm getting to that. It was a terrible event. R-Truth came out trying to explain to people that they still have cable. They can still watch it via ESPN, right? They don't need the app. But the problem is a lot of people don't have cable anymore. This is not the 1990s. This is not the 2000s. This is not the 2010s. Cable is a thing of the past. Many people cut the cord with it. And then other people are saying, well, so what? But yeah, let's get into it. Wrestlepalooza, right? Opening match: Brock Lesnar versus John Cena. As Damien mentioned, John Cena lost this match. Now, a lot of fans are upset about this because he lost the match. He didn't just lose the match, guys. He lost it the same way he lost fucking SummerSlam 2014. If you guys remember SummerSlam 2014, that was when Suplex City came into existence. That was when Brock Lesnar destroyed fucking John Cena. I remember I was watching it with a kid at that time. And the kid was a huge John Cena mark. and he said he thought that John Cena died. That's how badly John Cena got fucked up at that SummerSlam, right? But he got fucked up in this SummerSlam, and you saw kids in the audience crying. Now, a lot of people are upset about it because they want to see John Cena win all the time, in his retirement tour in his last year. But honestly, I understand it. You know what I mean? Because they want to draw this one out. They want John Cena to, possibly Brock Lesnar will be his last match, the last match he'll have, right? So they want to draw it out. They want to prolong it a little bit. And I understand that, that logic. But, still, Brock Lesnar looked huge. Like he obviously is on the steroids again, guys. He's been steroiding it up since he's been gone from WWE. So, yeah, he wins. He destroys John Cena. The Vision, Bronson Reed and Braun Breaker with Paul Heyman defeat the Usos. So once again, too, the heels go over. Now on SmackDown, was not Friday, but the Friday before that. Brock Lesnar had an altercation where he came face to face with the Vision, and Paul Heyman was there, and they said something to each other. So maybe Brock Lesnar could be joining the Vision and could be reuniting with Paul Heyman, or at least joining the Vision for War Games, because War Games is coming up as Survivor Series in 2 more months. You know what I mean? So you have Brock Lesnar in the Vision going against Roman Reigns, the Usos, and John Cena. That seems like a pretty good War Games match. And the next match is the best match on the show. And that is Stephanie Vaquer taking on Io Sky for the vacated Women's Championship. Obviously, we didn't talk about it when it happened, but Naomi had to vacate the Women's Championship due to her being pregnant. So what was supposed to be Stephanie Vaquer, a.k.a. Stephanie Velcro, the whole bit with with Naomi messing up her name was like, funny. But the title was vacated. The title had to be given up. So this was the best match on the show. This was actually a very classic match. I love this match. They stole the show. The Devil's Kiss. What guy doesn't like to see the Devil's Kiss? Like, that's the sexiest wrestling maneuver ever, right? You know what I mean? So congratulations to Stephanie Vaquer. It was the night of the Stephanies because there was another announcement coming up that Stephanie McMahon Helmsley is being inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2026. Now, obviously, I don't know how to feel about this. David, Damian, Sean, I don't know how you guys feel. To me, I feel like Vince McMahon should be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame before Stephanie. Damian says he wants to see John Cena versus Roman Reigns, which would be a rematch from SummerSlam 2021 one last time. I don't want it to because Roman's the guy. They need to pass the torch to somebody, and Cody is not it. you know what I mean? But congratulations to Stephanie Vaquer. I picture there will be a pretty eventful title run for her. CM Punk and his wife AJ Lee returning to WWE after 10 years, in a mixed tag team match. Now, honestly, guys, AJ Lee was super rusty. She did pretty well. Becky carried her the best she could, but she was super rusty, and you could see it. Even in her promos, the promos that she was doing on Raw were super rusty. Talking about, I'm a Puerto Rican girl from New Jersey. I might stab a chick. And here's another thing. In the beginning of the year, when WWE went to Netflix, we're like, all right, they're off USA Network. They're on Netflix now. They can curse. Why stab a chick? Sounds like some bullshit. Stab a bitch. Even back in the Attitude Era, they could say the word bitch. You know what I mean? They hyped it up with Cody Rhodes, at Elimination Chamber saying fuck, right? In the feud with The Rock. So why not have them curse? Like, it seemed kind of lame. But anyway, I felt like AJ was super rusty, but Punk and AJ get the win against Rollins and Becky. So I don't know where they'll go from here. A lot of people want to see AJ Lee take on her quote unquote wrestling daughter, Roxanne Perez, and that might happen. Like I said, AJ's back for the long run, so a lot of possibilities when it comes to that. Um, and the last match, Cody Rhodes defeating Drew McIntyre by pinfall. This match was super weird because Drew McIntyre was for the WWE Championship. Drew McIntyre kept posting these memes on social media talking about he wants Cody Rhodes' ass and shit. And I'm like, yo, this is super gay and suspect. Why are you doing this? You know what I mean? Like, this was a run-of-the-mill Cody Rhodes match. I'm retaining the championship, but at the end of the evening, we saw a face-off between Cody Rhodes and Seth Rollins. So of course, they're probably going into Survivor Series against each other. That's the tradition in Survivor Series: the World Heavyweight Champion and the other champ. Okay, it happened twice. I only remember it from once, Damien. Maybe you remember a different time. I'm sure you're right. I remember their promo with where John Cena buried his ass. Uh, but the World Heavyweight Champion against the WWE Champion. So that's probably going to happen with uh, Cody and Seth Rollins at Survivor Series. But overall, this show sucked balls, man. They need to really do better when it comes to this. You know what I'm saying? I heard there was a lot of ads. Like I said, due to my feelings about the Jimmy Kimmel situation and Jimmy Kimmel being fired, it hurt. But I canceled my ESPN/Disney subscription. It hurt because Disney has a lot of stuff that I like, the old classic movies. Then now they're with WWE and they have Star Wars shit. But I just can't stand by a company that restricts free speech. You know what I mean? That's not what I'm about. And I'll continue to watch it illegally because fuck them. You know what I'm saying? I don't support mocking a guy's death, but at the same time, we have a video that's an hour long of why I feel like that's not what went on, and they misjudged it. you know, I realize how historic this is, for WWE and shit, but fuck it, it came at the wrong time. In the pregame show, Stephen A. Smith mentioned that his favorite wrestler was Goldberg, and Stephen A. Smith is known for his bullshit takes when it comes to other sports, but when it comes to wrestling, it's a bullshit take. And they kind of called him out for it, which I don't get because like Goldberg was just on their TV screen not so long ago, wrestling Gunther. you know what I mean? So they were promoting him. So like, why are they shitting on him now? But who knows? But anyway, this pay-per-view revealed that Triple H doesn't know this John Cena retirement tour is the biggest fucking flop in the history of wrestling ever since the Invasion angle. This John Cena retirement tour had been handled poorly from the start, from the poorly timed heel turn to the fucking loss to Brock Lesnar and just in general. They have no idea what they're doing with John Cena. They're disrespecting him like I don't know what. You know, you know what I mean? Like Triple H on NXT, he had a confrontation with Shawn Michaels, and it was like, "What if I came back?" And I'm like, "Oh well." I was 2021, Damien, where they wrestled each other. It wasn't 2020. It was 2021 when they wrestled each other, and Brock came out at the end. Because it wasn't 2020 because Roman didn't wrestle at SummerSlam in 2020. I mean, he didn't wrestle most of 2020 because of his health issues. But yeah, 2017, No Mercy. Was that the Suffering Succotash promo, I think, that Roman cut? That is an infamous promo. But for Sean, I think um, this was the first time seeing AJ Lee because at that time, AJ Lee's time in WWE, I don't think Sean was watching. Uh, you know, her last, her last time there from from like 2011 or 12 to like 2014. She was in the company, but they need to work with her. But Stephanie McMahon going into the WWE Hall of Fame, I joke with a friend now, and like I said, so WWE's partnering with Disney. So does that make Stephanie McMahon the billion-dollar Disney princess? Huh? And the Undertaker was a weird choice to introduce it because, like, where to, Stephanie? If anybody that was watching in 1999 when the Undertaker abducted Stephanie McMahon and had remember the dark wedding, the black wedding, where he abducted her, and the whole higher power storyline. It was me, Austin. It was me all along, Austin. Where Vince basically had the Undertaker in the uh, Ministry of Darkness um, abduct Stephanie McMahon and kidnap her and try to get married to her by nailing her to a cross, the Undertaker symbol. And then at the last minute, Stone Cold Steve Austin comes out and he starts beating the Undertaker's ass. Yeah, I think a lot of people did. You know what I mean, Damien? The asking price, even if you don't care about this whole Charlie Kirk and Jimmy Kimmel shit with Trump, you know what I'm saying? Even if you don't care about that, you don't follow politics, even that, but even so, like a lot of WWE fans are upset anyway because of them moving from Peacock. You know what I mean? Like we were cool with Peacock, you know what I mean? Like I said, when Vince McMahon I said this last night in the live stream, and Vince McMahon, you might not like Vince McMahon, you know what I mean? You might feel like his booking decisions and his the latter half of his time with his own company was bad, you know what I mean? Like 2018, 2019 or whatever. And because of what he did, right, or is alleged to have done, I'll say alleged because we don't know. You know what I'm saying? There's no proof. You know what I mean? But allegedly, I know believe all women, right? Hashtag me too. But you can't believe all women. Believing all women is bullshit, right? So Vince McMahon understood the wrestling fan. You know what I'm saying? He understood his customer base. He understood it. TKO doesn't understand the customer base. Just recently, Mark Shapiro, you know, Mark Shapiro, hands ringing, yes, you know, um, announced or tweeted out that of the two companies that TKO owns, WWE and UFC makes more money, so they're going to basically try to have WWE compete with that, like internal competition within the company between the two, and have WWE's ticket prices go up. They're already through the roof. You know what I'm saying? Like they're already unaffordable unless you're a green shirt guy, and they want to make them more unaffordable for the consumer. So I hope you're happy, everybody that wished that Vince McMahon was gone and said that once Vince McMahon steps down and everything was going to be hunky dory, because you got your wish, and now Vince McMahon is no longer the owner, and now the fan is the one that suffers. Everybody glazing Triple H, acting like Triple H is the fucking best booker in the world. Triple H, I don't know, Jamie. He says, when is Sasha Banks' contract up in the indie company? I mean, they give her the world over there. They stay glazing her. She has so many fucking titles. It's unbelievable. But I think a couple more years, it would be cool to see her versus AJ Lee. That's what people really want to see. But okay, you thought it was great. I didn't like it. But anyway, I'm glad you thought it was great. But everybody talking about Triple H, this and that. To me, he fucking, he's a one-trick pony. Like everybody talks about how bad Eric Bischoff was, or how bad Vince Russo was. Right? Each one only had 2 years, and the only thing Eric Bischoff come up with was the NWO. Only thing Vince Russo came up with was the little, the Attitude Era stuff. But Triple H, he had his best years. His best years was that Bloodline shit. You know what I'm saying? What has he done other than the Bloodline shit that is tremendous booking, great long-term story booking? Nothing. you know what I mean? Like Jamie liked it. Jamie liked the pay-per-view or the PLE, whatever you call it. Want to say, call it. What? And he's probably a fan of Triple H's booking. I don't know if he is. Or, you, you know, But if he is, explain to me something that Triple H has done that is great booking. Now, I'm not saying that Tony Khan is any better. You know what I mean? Because what did AEW counter with for All In? They countered with Darby Allin setting Jon Moxley on fire. Which is the weirdness that is AEW. You know what I mean? Jon Moxley tries to be Mick Foley, but he's just the bargain basement version of Mick Foley. Neither pay-per-view was good, but now that they're doing the Saudi Arabia thing and they're moving WrestleMania to Saudi Arabia in 2 years, and everybody's complaining about the ticket prices to various WWE events, Ricochet got online and Ricochet was like, well, if you think WWE is too much money, how about, trying to give AEW a chance? You know what I mean? But they have to get better stories. They have to get better stories. They have to be less match centric. That's the problem with AEW. They're too match centric. They think that everything is a 5-star match, and everything is all about the matches. The matches are a means to an end. It has to end in a match. That's wrestling, but at the same time, it has to be good storytelling. And WWE had tremendous storytelling when it came to the Bloodline. But after the Bloodline's over, it's like they can't let the Bloodline go. They must keep going back to the Bloodline well. Now they have MFT version of the Bloodline with, Solo and JC Mateo and all those guys. You know what I mean? And they still trying to juice every little ounce of Bloodline juice out of it, because that was really all that Triple H had. Yeah. Jamie says Vince is the father he never had. Yeah, so obviously, I misjudged you, Jamie. Maybe you don't like Triple H's booking. You're not one of Triple H's fanboys. Triple H's fanboys. Damien says, "Good thing we have AEW and TNA." Well, TNA is partners with WWE, so I mean they're not really competition. WWE basically controls them. They're WWE's bitch. Trick Williams is their champion, and Trick Williams is a WWE wrestler. You know what I mean? They're thinking about, I heard, moving Joe Hendry to the main roster. So all of Triple H's fanboys, you know, they're like the wrestling version of MAGA. You know what I'm saying? They're mesmerized by Triple H. You know what I mean? Like they act like Triple H can do no wrong, but Triple H isn't that good. You know what I'm saying? He's not that good as a booker. Not when it comes to a lot of great storylines. You know what I mean? Like maybe a few, but not a bunch. You know what I mean? Like, okay, basically the same kind of criticism that you can level at Eric Bischoff, right? Or that you can level, yeah, especially Eric Bischoff, because with Eric Bischoff, it was like, okay, well, what's next after NWO? He didn't have anything else. You know, like he didn't know what to do after NWO, as good as NWO was. Triple H was the same way with the Bloodline. Okay, the Bloodline's over now. Where do we go from here? And he just was lost. You know what I mean? Jamie says, "Thank you, Vince, for all the WrestleManias." Absolutely. Vince was the man. You know what I mean? Like Vince lived and breathed this shit. That was what made WWE special. That during the Monday Night Wars, Sean and I were friends during the Monday Night Wars. We would talk about the differences back then in like 96 and 97 between WWE and WCW. And even though we were NWO guys and we were into NWO, we understood the difference of Vince McMahon. That Vince McMahon was a family-owned company. Vince's money was Vince's money. WCW's money was Ted Turner's money. That's why they could piss it away and give everybody guaranteed contracts. But Vince, it was his blood, sweat, and tears. It was his family's company. It was in his family legacy since his grandfather, you know what I'm saying, and his father and himself. You know what I mean? He mortgaged everything to produce the first WrestleMania in 1985. You know what I mean? But these people, this company, TKO, right? They don't give a shit about the people. They don't give a shit about the company. They don't give a shit about the company's legacy. They don't give a shit about wrestling, you know what I mean? Or sports entertainment or whatever you want to call it. They don't care. They don't care like Vince because it's not theirs. It's their baby. It's just like Star Wars, the same thing like Star Wars, the exact same thing. The Star Wars fan base, after the prequels came out, they bitched and they complained about how horrible George Lucas was, how the prequels ruined their childhood. They made movies about it, they made documentaries about it. So finally, in 2012, George Lucas threw up his hands and said, "Fuck it, I'm selling my company." And what happened when he sold the company? At first, everything was good. Force Awakens was a massive hit, reintroducing Star Wars and back into the cultural zeitgeist for the first time in many years. Right? Everybody loved it. But what happened then next? What happened in 2017? The Last Jedi. It fell flat from there, and Disney hasn't known what to do with the franchise since. So the same thing has happened to WWE. Fans bitched and complained. They hated how Vince was booking shit. They said, why doesn't Vince just retire? So finally, Vince does retire. And finally, he decides to sell the company. And at first, everybody loves it. You know what I'm saying? But then after that, you know, the bloodline story. And after that, it goes south because nobody cares anymore. It's all about money. Damien's absolutely right. That's what happens. You know, that's what happened to Star Wars. That's what happened to WWE. That's what even happened. Well, Marvel, you can't really say that. You know what I'm saying? Because when Disney bought Marvel, they took it to. Yeah, I remember that, Jamie. Um, We were on here at that time. I made a video on the first Dynamite back in the day, and we all thought it was going to revolutionize wrestling. It was the first time ever that since 2001 that wrestling was back on the Turner Network, given the history, and we were all excited. You know what I mean? A brand new company, but quickly it went away. And what happened with that was that Tony Khan was a mark. Tony Khan listened to the wrestlers. Tony Khan is a punk, a pussy. We saw with the whole CM Punk controversy. I'm scared for my life. It became a joke among fans, but this is how this man is. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have to balance it out. You have to have the expertise. The reason why Vince McMahon was successful, I'll tell you guys why I believe Vince McMahon was successful. Because Vince McMahon had an equal balance of wrestling product knowledge and product concern, coupled with the authority to tell the wrestlers no. So, you know, and the respect of the wrestlers. Tony Khan, he has a lot of knowledge about the product, but he has no respect among the wrestlers. And the other people, TKO, they have no product knowledge. So they might have the respect of the wrestlers, but they have no product knowledge. Vince McMahon had both. Vince McMahon knew when to give the wrestlers what they want and when not to. He wasn't going to let the wrestlers overrun him and bully him like Tony Khan is. He wasn't trying to be friends with the wrestlers either. You know what I'm saying? Like, when wrestlers didn't want to do certain things, he didn't roll over. You know, Stone Cold Steve Austin in 2002, he didn't want to job to Brock Lesnar. So what did Vince tell him to do? Go fuck yourself. And Austin took his ball and went home. And then it was Austin who came crawling back, not Vince. Vince would have went on without Austin. Vince went on without Bret Hart. Vince went on without Hulk Hogan. Tony Khan, he rolls over for everybody. He lets everybody take advantage of him. Everybody take a piece of his own of his company, and the wrestlers run the fucking show. And you can't have that. That is always a recipe for disaster in wrestling. No matter who it is, whether it's Kevin Nash, whether it's Kevin Nash running a WCW in the late 90s, whether it's Dusty Rhodes running Jim Crockett Promotions, whether it's Jeff Jarrett running TNA in the 2000s and 2010s. When a wrestler is in charge of a company, it will always fail. Now, Tony Khan's in charge, but is he really in charge? You know what I'm saying? All these wrestlers, the Young Bucks and all these guys, you know, being EVPs, telling them what to do, he has no balls. You know what I mean? He is a total cuck for these wrestlers. You know what I mean? And you can't run a business like that. There has to be a separation between employer and employee, you know, for any business to run, especially wrestlers, because remember, they're independent contractors. So that's Jamie, what I believe happened with AEW. They had a lot of potential, but they just, you know, they didn't have somebody who, you know, the wrestlers didn't respect him the way they did Vince McMahon, because Vince McMahon's family has legacy in the business. Vince McMahon is Vince McMahon, and there was only one Vince McMahon. You know, Tony Khan made the same exact mistake that Eric Bischoff made, trying to be cool with all these wrestlers, knowing that wrestlers will try to, you know, wrestlers are basically professional liars and professional conmen, and they will take advantage of you if they can. You know what I mean? So that's basically what they did, you know, to him. And that whole CM Punk incident proved that, you know. But yeah, you're absolutely right. In 2019, everybody was excited, you know. And when Cody left, that was the first blow to them. Then when CM Punk left, that was the second blow to them. And then it was just like, okay, now people like Mercedes Moné could come in and everything get handed to her. And this guy, Tony Khan, doesn't care. Because again, Tony Khan's money is his father's money. You know what I'm saying? This is just a side business for him. This is not their main business. They have the Jacksonville Jaguars. They have the team in London. The soccer team. This is like another business venture, like when his dad had Black News, a black centered news company. You know, like you know, it's whatever to them. It's like a tax write off. So they're not as invested in the product as Vince McMahon is. Neither is TKO. Like wrestling is effectively dead. You know what I mean? When Vince McMahon left, and then putting Vince's daughter in there above him is a slap in the face of fans because Vince deserves to be there. You know what I'm saying? Vince McMahon made professional wrestling what it is today. Like Jamie said, Vince was a father to many. You know what I'm saying? Inspiration to many because it wasn't like Vince McMahon was born with a silver spoon in his mouth either. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, he had a father who was a wrestling promoter and a grandfather who was a wrestling promoter and boxing promoter, but Vince McMahon didn't meet his father until later in life. He was raised by his stepfather and his mother in the Carolinas in a trailer park. That's where he was born. And he if anybody typifies the pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality, it was him. Because he endured years of abuse, years of physical abuse at the hands of his stepfather, and even sexual abuse, possibly as he hinted, at the hands of his mother. And psychological abuse. So Vince was in a very traumatic situation. And even when he met his father and he learned to become a wrestling promoter, it wasn't like the father just gave him the company. He bought the company off of his dad, and and the other investors like Gorilla Monsoon, Arnold Scullin, and Phil Zacco, and all them. He worked his way up, and he turned a business that was had no acknowledgement, no recognition, no respect, right? At all. Zero respect, zero acknowledgement. You know, he made it into $1 billion business on his own, basically with his own ingenuity and his own grit. So he is the American dream. He's the true American dream. He's the true American success story. He is proof that you can make it in the United States. Despite your circumstances. And like I said, he did it with a business that nobody respected ever. Ever in the history of entertainment was wrestling respected. See, ESPN, all the big major sports outlets at the time. Tony Khan is a Rick Moranis looking motherfucker. You know what I mean? Like you almost expect Mercedes Monet to bust out suddenly, bust out singing "Suddenly Seymour" to him. At the next Dynamite taping, or Tony Storm, more like Tony Storm, "Suddenly Seymour." If you saw the movie Little Shop of Horrors from the '80s, "Suddenly Seymour." He's a wrestling fan he's the worst kind of a wrestling fan. He's a he's the dirt sheet type wrestling fan, the internet smart wrestling fan, the type of fan that glazes Dave Meltzer and thinks that everything Dave Meltzer writes in his newsletter is gospel. And half the time, if you've been a fan of Meltzer for years, which I have, subscribed to the Wrestling Observer newsletter, half the time the shit that Meltzer prints is wrong anyway. Never happens. You know what I'm saying? He's a gossip monger. You know, what I mean, it's a wrestling tabloid. It's not a wrestling newsletter, really. It's a tabloid because much like the regular tabloids, like the National Enquirer, they don't have journalistic credibility. You know what I mean? I mean, it's an outlet to report about wrestling because, again, wrestling was not respected by the sports reporters, the true sports reporters that were in like the New York Times or the New York Post or the Chicago Sun Times or the LA Times, any of those big papers. So they would never talk about wrestling. So it 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 opened up an opportunity, a business opportunity for people that have no journalistic credibility whatsoever to just put out a bunch of newsletters. And this goes for Dave Meltzer. This goes for Wade Keller. You know, they just guess speculation based on rumors, that they've heard. And, it's really anachronistic in a way because there's no need for it. Things like the Wrestling Observer anymore because the business is open. One of the things that made it exciting back in the day was that the business was closed. Kayfabe was still alive. We didn't know much. The internet didn't exist. So getting a copy of the Wrestling Observer newsletter or the Pro Wrestling Torch was exciting for fans like me that wanted to know about the inner workings of the business and the wrestlers and the promoters' real life personas and stuff. You know what I mean? But it doesn't need to exist now because much like cable, something else has come along to take its place in the internet. So now Dave Meltzer just thrives on his reputation and kind of rests on his laurels. You know what I mean? But in actuality, um, what he calls five-star matches aren't really the great matches at all, really. They're just like he worships Japanese wrestling. And not that Japanese wrestling is bad, you know what I'm saying? But when Hulk Hogan died, the biggest hypocrite of them all was Dave Meltzer because he acted like Hulk Hogan, uh, that he always gave Hulk Hogan his respect in the newsletter, and he didn't. The Wrestling Observer always trashed Hulk Hogan. They always looked down on Hulk Hogan. They were too elitist for Hogan. They treated Hulk Hogan like he was fucking. Uh, if Dave Meltzer was Rush Limbaugh, Hulk Hogan was Barack Obama. You know what I mean? Like he was persona non grata when it came to that. You know what I'm saying? Uh, you know, for years they voted him as the worst wrestler of all time. But then when he died, it's like that typical phoniness that people always express. Oh, he was the best. If it was for him, we wouldn't be here. That's what we've been saying. You know what I mean? But all you did was trash the man. I hate that when somebody dies. Sean and I have talked about it. When someone dies, whether it's a public figure or somebody you knew in real life, and people act like they were always cool with them and they were friends with them. But we have the receipts, Dave. We know the things you used to write about Hulk Hogan. We know how we used to trash Hulk Hogan. I used to down Hulk Hogan as being the worst wrestler ever. Now I'm not saying that Hogan was a ring general, but I'm just saying, when he was alive, you didn't have anything good to say about him. So now that he's dead, you say all good things about him. You know what I mean? Phoniness. You know what I mean? And since AEW came into existence, Dave Meltzer has, praised AEW. Like AEW can do no wrong in Dave's mind. You know what I mean? It's like, and he's lost all journalistic credibility, even with people in the wrestling industry that used to like him, like Jim Cornette. But yeah, guys, that's all I have. That's no, I don't. Jamie asked, do I think that the Young Bucks would be successful was for Uncle Dave? No. They are a mediocre tag team. They're kind of a ripoff of the older tag teams that did act better. Like Rock and Roll Express, The Rockers, the Midnight Express, the Fantastics, Fabulous Ones. Um, they are not that good, and that's why they've never been in WWE. And WWE doesn't would never look at them. You know what I'm saying? And despite the fact that Kenny Omega is good, but especially his work with Okada, but he's not as good as Dave makes him out to be. He didn't have it what it took to carry a promotion. And the proof is in the pudding when it came to him, because if he had what it took to carry the promotion, he would have. They wouldn't have had to bring in John Moxley. They wouldn't have had to bring in CM Punk and other people that they put ahead of him. He didn't have the charisma, and it takes a lot for a guy who's never been in the WWE to carry a promotion. AJ Styles did it with TNA. Sting did it with WCW. Um, you have to have the ability to stand out, on your name recognition alone, and he just didn't, and the things that the Young Bucks do and Kenny Omega does, to ruin the credibility of wrestling, not to sound like Jim Cornette, you know what I mean? But Jim Cornette is odd because in real life he's a liberal, but in wrestling terms he's a real conservative. He's a hardcore conservative in terms of wrestling. Well, sometimes like conservatives in anything, any walk of life, they make sense. Just because something is old doesn't mean that you have to get rid of it. So just because kayfabe is perceived as dead doesn't mean you have to have matches with, little girls or blow up dolls or invisible men or any of that shit that you've seen Kenny Omega do, Joey Ryan do, or the Young Bucks do, all the stupid shit. You know, you can still maintain the facade of credibility. And the style of Jim Cornette's talking about still works and still gets over. Well, how do we know this to be true? Brock Lesnar. The reaction that Brock Lesnar gets is because Brock Lesnar has credibility. Brock Lesnar appears to be real. They know that him being a former UFC champion, he can actually fuck people up. You know what I mean? So even though we know it's a work, we don't want it thrown in our faces on a constant basis that it's a work by people that do stupid shit in the ring. Like a Orange Cassidy, like a Kenny Omega, like the Young Bucks. You know what I'm saying? Like, we still want credibility in our wrestling, even though we know it's a show. Because in any other walk of life and entertainment, you wouldn't see that. We all know The Sopranos was a show, but you didn't see James Gandolfini coming out and breaking character and talking as James Gandolfini instead of talking like Tony Soprano in the middle of a therapy session with Dr. Melfi. You know what I'm saying? You didn't see on Game of Thrones, you didn't see Amelia Clark say, step out of her Daenerys Targaryen outfit and be like, you know what? Fuck this dragon. None of this is real, and like this is all make believe. No, because it's a suspension of disbelief. Wrestling should be the same way and should be treated with the same kind of respect. While you're in the ring, while you're performing, the objective is to make it look like a real fight, not to just because we know it's a work. Yeah, that'd be funny. If Roman Reigns showed up and super punched the Elite, yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it still needs to be treated with some level of credibility. And basically, AEW lied in their initial pressers and initial stuff when they said that it was going to be a sports-like presentation. And that's what fans were really clamoring for. You know, they remembered ROH, the glory days of ROH, the Steens and stuff like that. You know, and they figured it would be something like that, something like Mike Awesome and Awesome and Tanaka in the later years of ECW. And it wasn't. It was a complete clown show. And that's what happened to AEW as well. I mean, they had a real opportunity to build something special because it was a company that had an internet following and it started from scratch. It basically no tie. The first company in wrestling history to really have no ties whatsoever with the National Wrestling Alliance. They had a real chance, but they didn't. Uh, they squandered it. By trying to be too much, to appeal too much to the internet marks. Wrestling is a lot like politics in the sense that you can't give your hardcore base everything it wants because sometimes what they want is just too far fetched, and it's not practical. What I'm saying? You're going to have to piss some people off and go with moderation in the end of the day because, well, you know, some people's dreams and aspirations are not that thought out. You know what I'm saying? A singles run would have been interesting for him, yeah, in 2019, yeah. That would have probably worked. And that's what I think. Where I think AEW went wrong too was they played too much to the marks, and you can't do that. You can't do that in business, you can't do that in politics, and you can't do that in wrestling. Even in movies, you can't do that. Too much fan service, giving them everything they want, is just, it's no originality in that. A bunch of people, oh, this is what I want. This is what I want because people in life, that are not working in that particular industry, they have the Santa Claus mentality. They're like kids, kids want everything out of the store, but they don't know how much things cost. They don't know the practicalities. They don't know how to accomplish things. Yeah, he could have, yeah. A Jeff Hardy type run. So they just want, they want and want and want, and they want, you know, this and they want all that. And the IWC is one of the most fickle um, group of fans in general because here's what happens with the IWC. I agree with Jamie about the Jeff Hardy thing. Is that the IWC will like a guy and they'll champion that guy. But as soon as the guy becomes popular, then the IWC turns against him. You know what I'm saying? The IWC will push and push and push for somebody like they push and push right now for Karrion Kross. But I guarantee you, if Karrion Kross were to come back and Karrion Kross were to dominate for a couple of months and get the push that he deserved, people would be saying, "Oh, Karrion Kross, he's so fucking boring. When why is he on our television screen?" So that thing that Daniel Bryan said about fans being fickle is not fans. The average everyday fan is just, again, I compare it to politics. The average everyday voter is not super far left or super far right. They're just a regular person. But when he says the fans are fickle, it's really the smart mark fans. It's really the internet fans, the internet wrestling community. And no, just because somebody is on the internet and talks about wrestling does not necessarily make them an internet wrestling fan. The internet wrestling community, it makes their fandom of wrestling, their entire personality. Which is kind of weird. you know And a lot of these type of fans, will love you on your way up, but hate you, once you get there. What I mean? And we saw it happen with Cody Rhodes. Everybody championed Cody Rhodes once he got there, but now everybody's like, "Oh, Cody Rhodes is so fucking boring," blah blah blah. Saw it happen with Daniel Bryan, and sometimes it's the way the guy's booked. I give him that, but a lot of times it's just like you don't know what you want. So why should promotions like WWE or TNA or AEW listen to you because you don't know what you want? You know what I'm saying? And plus, again, I go back to the political ideology. Politicians, in the primaries anyway, they play to their base, right? Because it's only among that party. But in a general election, they want to get as many people to vote for them as possible. right? So it's just like with wrestling promotions. They can't play to their base, the hardcore fans, because the hardcore fans are going to watch anyway. It doesn't matter what they put out; they're going to watch it because they're wrestling fans. So they want to try to get the casuals in. They want to try to get people that don't watch wrestling, or you know, people that watch once in a while. So they want to be as mainstream as possible. And Vince McMahon understood that. Vince McMahon understood that casual eyeballs grow the audience. That's why he always brought in celebrities. And he didn't bring in the celebrities in the type of way that TKO is doing now, where they're bringing in everybody and they're just showing people in the crowd and shit. He involved them and he made sure that the celebrities, gave the wrestler that they were working the angle with the rub. Mr. T and Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin and Mike Tyson. Sometimes it worked. We have other cases like Floyd Mayweather and Big Show where it didn't work, or Lawrence Taylor and Bam Bam Bigelow where it didn't work. But most of the time it worked. So, but with Jeff Hardy yeah, I agree that there could have been a thing, with Nick Jackson, but they squandered it. Tony Khan didn't know what he was doing. If Tony Khan would have had somebody, an advisor, somebody that was a former wrestler, because this is why agents in wrestling are mostly former wrestlers, because they've been in the ring. They know from personal experience, lived experience, as it were. You know, uh, uh, what works and what doesn't. He could have had an advisor that could rein him in. They say Vince Russo always needed a filter, right? When Vince Russo was booking him, by himself in WCW and in TNA, he failed when he had Vince McMahon to rein him in. So Tony Khan needed somebody like that. Tony Khan needed somebody to say, wait a minute, put the brakes on it. I know the hardcore fans or the sickos, because what did Tony Khan say? I booked for the sickos. I know these sickos, you know, uh, they want this certain type of wrestling, but this is not going to sell. This is not profitable. Do this instead, or 90% of this and 10% of that. If he'd have had somebody like that, but probably all of his ex wrestlers that he had working for him, like Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, veterans in the business, probably all yes men too, just trying to collect a paycheck or or whatever, and then tell him, listen, you can't do that. You know what I mean? Like you're gonna hot shot and you're gonna blow your load too soon, and that's the problem. That always is the problem with every promoter. The reason why they say that wrestling is cyclical, why it goes in cycles and it burns off and it's hot and it burns off and it's hot, is because promoters, and this happened throughout history, will throw everything at you and they'll have this really hot streak, whatever angle, whether it's the Freebirds and the Von Erichs in World Class, or it's the Bloodline with Triple H is booking, or it's the Attitude Era with Russo, or it's Bischoff in the NWO, or even Vince McMahon in the initial Hulkamania run in the 80s. They'll have all of that. They'll throw everything at you, and it'll be great. It'll be history making. It'll be monumental. But then they don't follow it up. They can't follow it up. So what they end up doing is they go to lesser versions of that. And we saw this in all these examples. With the Von Erichs, they brought in Lance Von Erich, a fake Von Erich. With Hulk Hogan left WWF, and they brought in Lex Luger as another Hulk Hogan, as an imitation Hogan. With Bischoff, you had 6, 7 different types of NWO, Wolfpack, LWO. They couldn't let it go. With the Attitude Era, uh, how many times did DX break up and reform, or Vince McMahon, turn heel again? You know, you know what I mean? Like, with JYD, like he left, and then Bill Watts tried to put any black guy in his spot. And Triple H now with the bloodline, all these different bloodlines. I mean, they don't know when to let things go and move on from that and do something else and keep the ball rolling, keep the momentum rolling. You And that's why wrestling is cyclical. That's why it has hot periods and cold periods, because people get tired of seeing the same tired outline of a storyline week in and week out. Uh, you know, that's why it goes in cycles. It wouldn't be that way if promoters kept ideas fresh. Memphis Wrestling, USWA, back in the day, the reason why USWA survived the territory wars and Vince wasn't able to put them out of business was because they would rotate booking between Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler. So one guy runs a little stale, and one guy, uh, gets burnt out. The other guy takes over. Jerry Larrett, Jerry Jarrett, or Jerry Lawler. You know what I mean? They just didn't have one guy. They had a bunch of people. Just those two guys, and even Bill Dundee and others, that came in. So anyway, thank you, Jamie, for contributing. Thank you, Sean, Damian, David. Peace, guys. Wrestlepalooza. Well, this is a new era in WWE, the ESPN era. We'll see where it goes. I say Triple H. It's time for him to tag out and tag in Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels does a pretty good job in NXT. The silver brand, it might not be as good as the black and gold years, but it's pretty good, especially a lot of hot women on NXT. So give Shawn Michaels a chance, or maybe The Undertaker. The Undertaker, they got The Undertaker booking AAA, and so far the AAA shows have been pretty good. So, give Shawn Michaels or Undertaker a chance, at booking, see what they got. What I mean? What fresh ideas they'll come up with. Peace, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to see my next videos coming out. Peace.